Welcome to the Equipcast for the Archdiocese of Omaha. Designed to help leaders to transform their cultures, to embody the pastoral vision, to be one church, encountering Jesus, equipping disciples, and living mercy.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Jim Jansen. I'm the Director of Pastoral Services for the Archdiocese of Omaha. My co-host today, Father Jeff Lorig, is coming to us from Midtown, Omaha. He's the pastor of St. Thomas More and St. Joan of Arc. Father, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. I'm excited about the Equipcast today.
Yeah, we've got a really great episode. So here's our guest today, David Drozd, old friend. David and I knew each other years ago and got reacquainted when his work as a research coordinator, a demographer for the University of Nebraska at Omaha, made the front page of maybe the Columbus newspaper. But we were fascinated by the story and then noticed like, wait, David Drozd, I know David. So we got in touch, we reconnected. David continued to wow us with some of the insight that the census data and some of the demographics for our ministry field, really the landscape that the Lord is calling us into. Just, it was such a gift for many of us here at the Archdiocese and a number of parishes here that we thought, man, we need to share this a little bit more broadly. So David Drozd, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me here. Hopefully we can provide some good insight.
So David, we always like to start with our guests. Just tell us a little bit about your story, where the Lord entered your life, a little bit about your faith journey.
Well, I'm the youngest of 8 children of a very strong Catholic family, small town, rural Nebraska, west of Columbus. I went off to college at University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and at first didn't really know where to get involved. But about my junior or senior year, I started to go to the Newman Center, and that's where faith kind of transformed from something that was important and I was definitely involved in to something where I was more engaged. So we would have the community nights, we'd have public service opportunities, we would pray at the Planned Parenthood in Lincoln, a variety of different things, and becoming good friends with people who are also strong people of faith is probably where my development really came from a spiritual standpoint. So the other thing that I had really always noticed was a connection with the Bible and Jesus speaking to us in the Bible. I could just, picture those stories of how Jesus' life went and the parables that he used, and always thought he was kind of speaking to me a little bit personally. So eventually met a spouse, and now we have a daughter who's a junior at Girls Catholic. So I started at UNO about 17 years ago and have been doing the same type of demographic research work ever since.
Okay, now let's just pretend I'm in the audience. What's a demographer? What do you do?
A demographer is basically anyone who studies population and the characteristics of the population. So mainline demographics are things such as age, sex, and race or ethnicity. But more broadly speaking, then we also get into the socioeconomic style variables such as income and poverty or unemployment and educational attainment, marital status and family size and types of housing and just all sorts of characteristics. So it's basically those things that go into people's day-to-day lives that might drive some of their personal situation. So what I mean by that is that like you would tend to see with higher levels of education, more likely to be employed, more likely to make a higher wage, and then also more likely to be a homeowner and things like that. So those demographic background characteristics kind of set the plate for the situations that people are in as we minister to them.
Okay, so let's dive in here a little bit. Tell us like what's happening in Nebraska. What's generally the kind of the demographic trends here?
There's a lot, so I'll start with those top line demographics. So when it comes to age and aging, that's probably the biggest phenomenon that's out there as people follow the baby boom population. And next year in 2021, the leading edge or the first baby boomers are going to turn 75. Obviously, 10 years ago, they were turning 65, and that's a special milestone when you're thinking of retirement. But at 75, things are a little bit different. Maybe there's more health issues. Maybe it's harder to get around the house. So that could impact a person's availability to come to Mass, for example, if they're having a hard time getting around, or especially now in the age of COVID. We all know that age is a risk factor for the severity of the virus. So Nebraska is aging from that standpoint of the baby boomers, that large segment of the population aging forward each and every year into different stages of their life. And it'll be very soon that all the baby boomers will be age 65 or older. So that has a lot of impact on our workforce. So when I talk to like the state chambers or local chambers of commerce, they're very interested to see a graph that I put up of what we call the prime age workforce, which just means ages 25 to 64. So out of college and before that typical retirement age. And in almost all areas besides Lincoln and Omaha, that's going to trend downward over the next 10 years. And one of the hardest things that employers have talked about regarding their challenges is being able to find skilled workers. So the point is that, okay, yes, that's difficult, and it's going to get more difficult because the pool of people that you can select from who are of working age is going to be going down as the baby boomers hit age 65 and look to retire. So aging is a key aspect. Diversity is the other one, where we're almost all areas of Nebraska are seeing our population become more diverse, meaning a higher portion of persons of color. And again, the background characteristics are different. So when an area sees growth, say, for example, in Hispanic Latino population, a lot of times the educational levels are substantially lower. Statewide, Nebraska's Hispanic population has about 50% have completed high school, and that ranks relatively low among the states. So there are some challenges that brings. We understand the language challenges, but one thing that, again, the demographic data tell us is that the ability to speak English is very high among the children of the first Hispanic Latino population that came into Nebraska in the 1990s. So for anybody who's born here in Nebraska, virtually no problem with being able to speak English. And as we know, that helps people get messages to their parents from school or things of that sort.
Wow. So Nebraska is getting older and more diverse at the same time. And I love the way almost instantaneously you were drawing out a consequence for us in the church and for ministry that honestly, I heard the rest of what you said, but I was distracted just thinking how often now as a parish thinks through the question, gosh, should we offer online ministry, or should we be live streaming the Mass? And sometimes the question, well, no, everybody in our parish is old. But, well, gosh, like as the population gets older, even more so, mobility restrictions and perhaps self-limitations because of a desire to avoid exposure to illness. Boy, more and more people are going to want to access the faith in ways that they feel safe and comfortable with, many times online.
Yeah, we might have a need to get creative. And that's, I think a lot of that has happened this spring and summer as places have adjusted to the restrictions. And I'm not involved in those decisions too much, but you can imagine how challenging they were. It's very difficult to accommodate everyone. And moving forward, there just might be more and more people who have some sort of challenge due to aging. And we know that the prevalence of various disabilities goes up as people age. Obviously, hearing and eyesight are a common one. So I know, for example, our parish in St. Columbkille and Papillion offers hearing assistance for those at Mass, or they do, again, record at least one of the homilies from the various weekend Masses and put that up online in case it is easier for people to hear. So I think there'll just be more and more of that as we move forward here, as we see the population age.
So I actually was talking to somebody this morning a young person who wants to come back to this parish in the Westgate neighborhood at St. Joan of Arc. And kind of what we've heard since I've been here is that, oh, this is an older neighborhood, and there's not much use, so there's not much hope either, like that things could really turn around. But I mentioned, like, well, I'm pretty sure a lot of these people around here are baby boomers, and while certainly we need to serve them, but also you can't expect them to be here in 5 or 10 years. These homes are going to become empty. So the church can't just think about, okay, we got to serve the baby boomers. We have to get ourselves ready to serve the younger families that are going to be moving in here.
Yeah, the transition that's coming as people either downsize and go maybe from a owned home to a rented property where they don't have to do snow shoveling and take care of a yard in the summertime. We're going to see more houses open up because of that. And then, of course, deaths will occur too. It is possible that some, what you might call older parishes, might make a transition to have newer families come in as that housing does change over. I think you might especially see that diversity increase just because that might be, in general, a little bit more affordable housing as opposed to what you're going to see on the fringe or where all the new developments are. There's going to be younger people go there too, but for different reasons. Mm-hmm. So housing, that's another one that's going to see a lot of change here in the years ahead.
I feel like already you can see, like, gosh, there's so many applications to how we minister to those who are in the geographic boundaries of our parishes, how we care for people, how maybe difficult decisions can be enlightened by the peek into the future that some of the demographics give us. But fundamentally, this is shepherding. I mean, one of Jesus's best parables to illustrate the heart of the Father is the shepherd who counts his sheep. And it's in the counting that he notices that one is missing. Yeah, I feel like this could be a really powerful tool for us to really care for those entrusted to us. That's a diverse group of people in the Archdiocese of Omaha. And I'm meaning not just, diverse in the sense of ethnicity, but the background. I mean, the Archdiocese of Omaha stretches from, of course, Omaha all the way up to O'Neill and Boyd County. Can we talk a little bit about the rural archdiocese? What's happening there?
Yeah, a lot. And before I mention that, just since you're talking about the shepherd, I think the demographic data is kind of how the sheep. So for any pastoral leadership, that's a way for them to really understand where their people are coming from, or again, what their challenges might be, what the opportunities might be. So that's one of the advantages in the data. Regarding rural Nebraska, we have seen population decline for quite some time. And that was really something that was a special issue in the 1980s with the farm crisis, when Nebraska had more than 100,000 people leave the state.
So you're saying during the 80s in the farm crisis, 100,000 people left Nebraska during that decade, or during the years of the farm crisis?
During the decade, we had a net loss of 100,000. So there's really no way to know exactly how many people left. Maybe it was 300,000, but 200,000 others moved into the state for a variety of reasons. But so the net loss was 100,000 people, which was relatively large, of course, but not unprecedented. And if you look at the figures back over time, we had even larger outmigrations in the 1930s and 1940s. So for a lot of Northeast Nebraska, the county populations hit their all-time highs in 1930 or even earlier for some locations, and have just been steadily downtrending since. And one of the reasons for that is the college phenomenon, and that has kicked in more recently. But it's people like myself. My wife's an example. She grew up in Dakota County. You head off to college, complete your degree or working on it. Maybe you start an internship and find a job there in your urban location, or you meet your spouse. Those college ages, very common for dating. And so if that spouse grew up in a different location, especially Lincoln or Omaha, it's much less likely that you're going to make it back to rural areas. So while there definitely is some movement of those in their late 20s and early 30s from urban to rural, it's usually only about 20% of the level of folks that leave in their late teens and early 20s to go to college. So we just keep having this net loss. And then the ramification as you lose those younger people is that's, of course, when people in their family formation and childbearing years. So if you're relatively low on 30-somethings, you're just not going to have a high level of births. And decade after decade after decade, as this happens, that pool of people in their 30s just gets smaller and smaller, and that puts pressure on the child numbers. So that's why we've seen school consolidations, whether public or private and parochial, across Nebraska, and especially in certain parts of the Archdiocese. So it's just one of the factors that we have to deal with. And I would just mention that, again, Nebraska has a lot of small towns because the way that we were developed back in the 1870s, 1880s was based upon either the railroad or the ability to travel by horse and carriage. And that's why towns are like 10 miles apart, roughly, because that was kind of like what a trip could get you, or when the railroad would have to refuel and things of that sort and drop off supplies. So we're in a different environment totally now with being able to drive numerous miles. And that's one of the reasons why some of our small towns population has gone down as well. You don't need as many people in a close proximity, so they spread out a little bit more. And of course, we've seen family sizes go down over time and things like that too.
How much is it a universal trend, or are there places where towns seem to be growing?
Well, it seems like there's a size continuum. So the smaller you are, the more challenges there are. So for Nebraska, kind of a nice even cut point is if you're a city of 5,000 or more, you're tending to do pretty well from a demographic population growth standpoint. And then if you're smaller than 5,000, especially smaller than 2,500 or 1,000, then we've seen higher levels of population loss in those areas. And it probably relates to just what people are going to do for work in smaller locations. And, some business, but definitely not the level of business that might require a bachelor's degree as what your larger locations would be, especially as we get into our cities that have at least 10,000 people, like Columbus or Norfolk or South Sioux City. There's just a little bit different environment there, more possibilities and opportunities for those with higher education.
I think there could be, I don't know, this is me maybe hoping for the future, a trend towards moving to small towns. Maybe not the small towns, but I don't know if you follow any other podcasts, but Joe Rogan, who has one of the probably the most listened to podcast on the internet, he just announced the other day that he's moving out of Los Angeles because he's like, if you look at it, like, this is untenable. Like, we can't support all these people. I'm getting out and I'm going to move to Texas, and I'm going to get into a small town where I can get to the clubs, because he's a stand-up comedian, so he can get to Houston and Austin. But like, he's got a lot of influence, and I wonder if there's a lot of people thinking that way, especially with COVID. Just like, Douglas County is a hotspot, South Sioux City is a hotspot. I wonder if there maybe this is like, if there's a silver lining to all this stuff. I know there's been lots of silver linings, but I just wonder if there might be a trend towards a smaller town life.
Yeah, it's definitely going to change people's perceptions and location preferences. So we're already hearing a lot of people who have left New York, New Jersey, and aren't going to go back. For here in Nebraska, we don't know what those trends are yet per se, but as we've seen an ability to work from home and not necessarily have to be tied into an office that's in probably an urban location, I think it opens the door for those who are interested, or maybe they want to move back to be closer to their parents or where they grew up. Now in the post-COVID environment, I think they'll have more opportunities to do so because we've gotten used to working remote.
I'm hearing advice there, right? For like small town chamber of commerce, start recruiting New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. It's like, hey, we got a lovely, beautiful church here, inexpensive real estate, beautiful sunsets.
Yeah, and I don't think it has to be that dramatic either. I think the lower hanging fruit would be to recruit among Lincoln and Omaha or Des Moines or somewhere more in the region, because it's a hard sell to get people from the coast to come here for whatever reason. Usually once they do, they love it. but the perception is that it's all corn and nothing to do, and et cetera, et cetera. But they find, when people come for the College World Series, for example, they just really love the dynamic nature of Omaha and how much there is to do, the zoo and all the philanthropic efforts for arts and entertainment and things like that. So marketing is a challenge. And I think the places that are more in tune with that, I think they will do better. They might already be starting that process of saying, hey, we're smaller. We are not going to have the types of outbreaks that you might see in these larger mega cities.
Douglas County is growing though, right? Douglas and Sarpy, there's been a huge population boom.
Yeah, Sarpy counties are growth leader in the state by far. Last decade, it grew almost 30%. This decade, in the 2010s, it'll probably be more around 20% growth. The housing marketing has been a little bit cautious ever since the 08, 09 kind of downturn in housing. They haven't really ever gotten quite to the same level of building permits and construction as we saw, say, in the mid-2000s. But Douglas County, very similar in western Omaha. You see a lot of new housing, and that leads to the population growth. Statewide, we have about 25 counties who are seeing population growth out of 93, so it's not a very high percentage. But there are rural success stories, and there are also a lot of, again, these places with the city of 10,000 that are definitely doing quite well. Kearney, Norfolk, Columbus.
Could you highlight just one or two of those rural success stories?
Well, one that comes to mind is Webster County, which is down on the southern border with Kansas, and they have some special telemarketing and inbound call service jobs that they've developed over the last 15 years or so. And when it comes to, again, net migration, having more people move in than move away, they're one of the few rural communities that have done that. Another one would be Garfield County, which is Burwell, Nebraska, so just a little bit west of the Archdiocese. But they have the Calamus Dam, so kind of a special recreational aspect. And again, we've talked about baby boomers, and some of them want to retire in a location where there is that recreational aspect of fishing and being outdoors, and again, far from your neighbors, perhaps. So we've seen in-migration there as well. But it just kind of depends on every unique circumstance. There are a lot of places that have sizable foundations and things that Nebraskans are very giving. So we do see a lot of support from the population that lives there.
Father, you were a pastor in the rural archdiocese up in Creighton. And now, Father, you're heading pastoral planning for the archdiocese. What are some of the implications for our faith community, for our parishes in the rural area? What does this mean for us?
First of all, I think the you can follow the trends, but they do change over time, right? So, that's why I'm sort of cautious about when people want to get in a conversation about closing parishes. I just want to hesitate a little bit because, first of all, the church doesn't envision that we would close parishes. So I just don't think it's the first option. And I know that, like, logically and practically, people think we should close parishes. And I would prefer to find a different way to keep them open and support them. At the end of the day, if you can't support it financially, and if you don't have enough priests, you have to figure out something else. But I think, practically that's where it impacts us in the rural counties. I think you have mentioned before that the rural counties are smaller today than they were in the 1800s. And
yeah, it's an amazing statistic for our smallest rural locations that, again, there was more population here in frontier days in like 1890 when no running water or very limited, no electricity, than what there is today. So it is very surprising. And one ramification of that is again what the number of kids will be. We have a lot of rural schools, and just speaking broadly across the state, compared back to 2000, we only have 9 counties that have more kids under 18 today than 20 years ago. So that's like 80 some counties that have fewer kids, and the number of kids is 25, 30, 35% below where it was just 20 years ago. So it kind of begs the question, will consolidations, including among the public school system, take place because those numbers are going down?
Yeah, that's certainly a question they constantly had in Knox County, where I was for 5 years, and then I was in Holt County for 4. So those are struggling communities. Although I was on the Economic Development Board for Creighton, Nebraska, so people weren't giving up. They were trying to find new ways to bring commerce in and to bring guests in. So
Yeah, so for example, in Holt County, in data I compiled for the Nebraska Community Foundation, they have seen a rise in births there. So over the last 10 years, roughly, it's bottomed, it's trended back upward. They've done a lot to try to get younger people to come back. And I mentioned before that, a lot of places that the number of 30-year-olds who come back as opposed to the people who leave for college is maybe only 20% come back. In Holt County, that's been around 40 or 50%. So again, still not enough to be neutral. They're still losing because of the college phenomenon, but it shows that those efforts can be successful as you, again, either cater to or at least stress the positives of low cost of living. You can know your neighbors, low crime. I mean, the rural places have a lot of advantages, but a lot of challenges too.
And it seems like it's forcing a creativity. There's opportunities now with what the internet is providing in terms of employment and connecting over a distance that certainly not easy, but there's opportunities hiding in there.
And I think to put a nice bow on what we're talking about is again, in rural areas, so many of the same people who are very dedicated and committed are doing so many things. They're involved in church. They might be involved on a community organization. They might be a volunteer firefighter, just because since there's not as many hands, the hands that are there are having to do more. And you kind of worry that there could be some burnout, or just, people can't do everything. They're trying to work, they're trying to raise kids and a family. So there are a lot of demands on people's times, I'd say, especially in rural Nebraska, since they're so involved.
Yeah. So when you ask, what do you have to, there's nothing to do there in those small towns. Well, all those people there are busy, as EMTs and volunteering at the church and doing the town festival. But it's their life. It's really like, it's just fun. It's not like you don't have to go do anything else.
It makes leaders too. Yeah, maybe it's just a Nebraska bias or stereotype, but those types of involvement and that necessity of community connection helps to build leaders. Experience matters. And, as the communities adjust to the realities that they're facing, leaders that know each other and people with experience serving in whatever, right, in a religious context or just as an EMT, that's a tremendous resource. Let's talk a little bit about urban Omaha, because we're no Chicago or Philadelphia, but there's a fair amount of what feels very urban. What's happening in the urban parts of Nebraska or Omaha in particular?
Yeah, well, one thing, we tend to follow specific numbers for specific population groups. So Black, African American for one, or Hispanic Latino for another. And what we are seeing is rising levels of educational attainment, specifically bachelor's degrees or more. So Omaha for Black population used to be well below the US average for Black regarding bachelor's degree or more percentage. We've now been able to catch the national average and go up above it. So just among like top 100 metros, for example, Omaha used to rank about in the middle regarding the portion of Black population that had a bachelor's degree. Now we're in the top quarter of the 100 largest metros in Black population for having higher education. So that's led to a drop in unemployment, a very large drop. It's been cut in half versus the Great Recession. And then we're seeing incomes go up, poverty come down. And the one variable that hasn't quite turned the corner yet is home ownership. So we're seeing a continued downtrend in home ownership among our Black population, same as the US trend. But we are hopeful that after a few years of these better economic conditions, and again, this is pre-COVID, so we know things are kind of crazy right now, and hopefully we'll rebound quickly. But it takes a few years to save for a down payment and or pay off student debt or those types of things. So homeownership is definitely going to be the last key item to turn. But we're seeing, again, various improvements within our Hispanic population as well. So things, at least pre-COVID, were definitely trending in the right direction.
Here in the Archdiocese, I think about some of the consolidation of our schools that have served our urban communities. I think about pews. I think about the consortium. I know that there's been an effort to respond to those realities and to make the church present there. Is there a consensus as to some of the initiatives and things that have helped to turn those trends?
Well, it's hard to know which ones in particular are having an impact, but I think that they all are to some degree. And, it was kind of after the World Herald kind of ran a pretty big series comparing population outcomes among whites versus our Black population locally, that a lot of initiatives started. There's Building Bright Futures. There was a variety of scholarship programs. I know at UNO, for example, there were special office created so that would provide more student support, because the hard thing about college is that life is going on at the same time. So it's complicated. Again, there's dating relationships. People are trying to work. Maybe you're a first time college attendee for your family. So you don't have like a mentor to go build upon their experience. So those types of efforts to not have people slip through the cracks or just give them the support that they need at the time when they need it have been really beneficial for moving people from starting college to actually finishing and obtaining that degree.
How do you see the church fitting in to this equation? If you can speak to a pastor who has a parish downtown or even just in the general kind of area that would be considered urban, what opportunities would you want to bring to their attention? What trends would you want them to be aware of?
I think one is just to let them know how important the work that they're doing is. I mean, they hopefully realize that, but, helping people along, those parishes or just through the school system that help people first get that high school diploma. Because if you don't achieve that, then the outcomes are really difficult. So just to give you an example, those who have less than a high school education, the poverty rate is over 20%. But if you can get at least a high school diploma, the poverty rate is about 10%. So there's a huge break there. And then if we can somehow move them on to a bachelor's degree, then poverty almost disappears. It's about 3% for a population that has a bachelor's degree or more. So
Wow.
That's why education is so important. So to let them realize the efforts that they're making, if you're having a bad day or whatever, to keep at it, because you really can have a lifelong impact on young people and their families.
Wow. David, let's just thank you for that. And, for all of our community leaders, the parishes that are downtown and in the urban areas, thank you. What you're doing matters.
Again, we sometimes don't know the situation that they're in. We're not walking in their shoes always. We can try to understand, but a lot of times there's things going on in the background that we might not be aware of that really has an impact. So just being cognizant of that is very helpful. The other thing I was going to say is that anything that parishes can do for family support regarding couples and couples being together. We all have all heard the stats of, when there's mother, father involved, that student outcomes are much better. And that extends to more social aspects, such as having lower crime or less teen pregnancy or whatever that characteristic is. So when we outreach to families and have them supported, whether that's initial, like marriage preparation, or family support as people go through. So some of more of the counseling aspects that, say, Catholic social services might provide, that's extremely important as well. Because when we see single parent families, that's when poverty rates are greatly elevated as opposed to married couples.
You're talking data, but it might as well be a theology course just on the foundations and the importance of caring for families and marriages.
It's also just hopefully encouraging for those of us who support inner city schools, whether it's the Qs or whether it's consortium. I sort of get stuck on well, we need to make disciples and our schools need to be doing that. And in many ways, we're trying really just to live out our discipleship by hopefully lifting kids out of poverty. Because if you can get a Catholic education, I don't know what the stats are on that. Like if the probability of being lifted out of poverty increases if you go to a Catholic school, might be something that the superintendent might want to look at if you had that kind of data. But education is a big part. And I think the stats that our schools have that show that the number of kids from those grade schools who go into high school probably increase. They're probably higher than the public school. So, and again, there's lots of variables that go into all that, but I just think it's encouraging when we think about, because we don't have a lot of parishes in North Omaha, and we struggle to serve in South Omaha. We just don't have enough priests that speak Spanish, and it's just really difficult. I mean, I think the priests that are there and the people that are loving it, they love serving, and they're amazing, and they always encourage me when I see them how they work and do ministry. But I sort of maybe like, gosh, isn't there more that we could do? And the words when you talked about how education can really lift people out of poverty, I think that encouraged me that we're doing the right thing with pews and with consortium. I think there's more we could do. I'm familiar with a group called Abide that places themselves in neighborhoods to really just to abide with it, to live there and to grow in relationship, and really can help families, not through programs, but really through relationships.
All those efforts are just so worthwhile just because they truly do make a difference. And like I said, not only can that strengthen those who are doing the ministry day to day, but maybe that's another point that our benefactors, need to know for how important their support is, because without the financial support, it's hard to run any program, no matter what it is. We do see the impact across the board from a variety of different programs.
Listening to the two of you talk, I'm inspired. It's like, gosh, the work that is happening at some of our urban parishes, and Father, you mentioned pews and consortium, like those are something for all of us in the Archdiocese to be proud of, to rally around. And I'm reminded, it's a little bit trite, but I think it's true, that kind of turn of the phrase that, we don't serve them, we don't serve the communities of urban Omaha because they're Catholic. We serve them because we're Catholic. So thank you, David. That's really helpful. Let's just talk a little bit about the suburbs. I think, depending on your perspective, life is, maybe imagined to be perfect in the suburbs. But I remember a presentation you did not too long ago. We just talked about some of the hidden poverty west of 72nd. Sometimes I think we imagine poverty only to be something that you find downtown or on the off ramps of the interstate when you get a chance to connect with someone who's asking for some help. Can you talk a little bit about that, the hidden poverty that's hiding in our suburbs west of 72nd?
That's one thing that we have seen shift again. If you go back to 2000, which was one of the best economic environments after the 1990s growth and the dot-com boom and all that, there were only 3 neighborhoods west of 72nd that had a poverty rate of 10% or more. So an elevated level of poverty was very uncommon. But in more recent years, rather than being 3 neighborhoods, there's like 23 neighborhoods where poverty is over 10%, and 5 of those have poverty rates over 20%, all west of 72nd Street. So again, you throw numbers around, but to put that into perspective, that's either 1 in 10 or 1 in 5 people who are in poverty. So if you kind of consider your church and maybe the pew or 2 in front of you, out of every 10 people, at least 1, maybe 2 are going to be in poverty if it was spread across the board equally. That is a concern. It's something that isn't as well known for sure, especially as we talk about suburban areas or Western Douglas County, just to realize that there are pockets of poverty. And while that is largely centered around what I'd call like west of Benson, so around Maple and Fort Street, close to I-680, that's kind of where one pocket of that is. There is also poverty that's elevated in Millard and in Valley. It'd be surprising to a lot of folks to realize that there are those harder economic situations out there in what is perceived to be our higher income areas.
How would a church recognize that? How would a community of believers recognize that? And again, I know this could be a whole nother podcast, but how do you begin to step into that?
Good question. Well, I think you see it on the ground to a degree. Again, I'm at St. Columkille in Papillion, and for Thanksgiving we have a ministry where we deliver boxes of turkey and the stuffing and all the things that a family might need, not only for Thanksgiving but like for an entire week. And there is always, hundreds of households in the nearby area that call in to request to be part of that program. So again, people might not realize that, Papillion is probably one of the highest income places in the area, but poverty exists, and there's different circumstances and new people to the area. Sometimes there's that direct connection of people calling in or coming to visit the parish office or St. Vincent de Paul to see what kind of assistance is available. Other times the numbers can tell us a little bit about what the situation is, but then maybe there's some outreach as well that places can do to realize, oh, here's an apartment complex. Maybe some individuals there might be needing some support. Is there a way where we could leave flyers in the area that people could access? And just be aware that we have not only our church services, but other ways that you might be able to participate in the various church ministries. It's a hard question, but I think that there are ways to try to reach people where they're at.
Well, it seems like correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a correlation. If there's a higher instance or concentration of poverty, chances are what's probably correlated to that is opportunities for educational help, opportunities for family assistance, because there might be more single parent households there. And so obviously, providing material assistance in terms of food, but then some of those other supports we talked about, educational support, encouragement for families, childcare and support for single parent homes. Like the opportunities seem almost endless because it seems like those things cluster together.
Yeah, and we're seeing that right now, of course, in the COVID situation. Nebraska has a lot of what we would call working poor. So we rank very highly, second highest among all the states, when we take a look at of our families in poverty, how many either have a worker or have a worker who is working full-time and all year round, and still their income is just not high enough to get above the poverty level. So when you have something like either outright suspension of a job, say at a restaurant or cleaning service or whatever, hotel accommodations that might be going on right now, that will just further make difficult living situation. So right now, I imagine we're just seeing a lot higher demand for basic needs, food and maybe rent assistance or electricity and other utilities.
So we've mentioned the word poverty several times, and I think it's important that we define that, because when I was doing some of my studies for the pastoral planning, I thought, well, okay, what does this mean? And I was shocked because I think I'm poor as a priest. Everything's kind of taken care of for me, with room and board and all that. So I never have to worry about that. But my salary isn't that huge. So I thought, well, my salary, it's got to be below poverty level. What is the definition of poverty?
Yeah, so poverty is kind of a concept. It's actually a mathematical calculation, not a complex one, but it takes up every individual in the family, their income, whatever earned income that is from wages, salary, or Social Security income, anything that's monetary income coming in. And it divides it by a threshold that is set based upon how large the family is. So the common example is if you're a family of four with two parents and two children, that level of income, the poverty level is about $25,000 per year. If you're a person living alone, the poverty threshold is much different, around like $12,000 a year. So Social Security income for an older person is usually enough to get above the poverty line, but just barely, not much above the poverty line. So again, college students, for example, have a lot of elevated poverty because you might only be working part-time and these types of things. But with that measure, as it makes the calculation, if your income is $25,001 and you're above the poverty line, you're not in a much different situation than if you're $10 below the poverty line. So it really is just a statistical measure to see. And that's why, for example, like free and reduced lunch goes up to 1.85 times the poverty line for eligibility for that, within the school system, for example. So people are kind of constantly moving into and out of poverty from time to time as their economic situation changes. But it is a difficult concept to work through.
But if you just use that example, if there's 4 people in the family, mom, dad, and 2 kids, and they're making $25,000, and then just imagine the percentage of the population in your zip code, whatever, I don't know, like in the Cathedral neighborhood, you think, oh, that's really good. But I think it's like 30% poverty. Like, so 30% of your people right there are like, if there's a family of 4, they're making $25,000 or less. And just so those of us who are listening, who do okay, like, what would you do if you only had $25,000 and you had to take care of 4 people? Like, and there's a lot of people in our neighborhoods that live that way.
Right. And poverty doesn't necessarily speak on the income that would be needed to provide a certain level or standard of living. It was established to kind of talk about what would kind of be the basic nutritional requirements for food that you would need to support that family, and a few other costs. But it was largely initially developed in the 60s based upon food costs. Well, again, we know with childcare and healthcare and all the costs that a family faces, I know a lot of groups would say that you need to be in the $50,000 to $60,000 range to provide a realistic amount of income to provide a nice situation for your family. So again, the poverty measure isn't perfect by any means, but it does allow us to compare across geographies and see where it's relatively higher or lower.
Yeah. So when we ask question, why is there so much violence? Why are people so angry? Why are they rioting? Why are there so many people in jail? Like, why are so many families broken? If we ask these questions, like, well, because they have a very different situation than us. And I know it's in America and everybody has a chance to get, it's a free country, it's free education, and everybody can pursue the American dream. But for many people, they're already starting from way behind the start line. And I don't think we often realize that. Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out. Like, poverty isn't just like they're kind of struggling from paycheck to paycheck. It means like they're not really paying their bills.
Yeah, and one thing about poverty that goes against perception is that people think poverty is chronic poverty, where month after month or year after year you're in a poverty situation. Well, that's actually relatively low. When you look over a 3-year period, Census has these products and surveys that track this. Only about 3% of the population would be in poverty in all of those 36 months over 3 years. But when you break it down to a 2-month segment, where your 2-month income would be below the monthly threshold of income, that's up to 1/3 of the population that has what we call a bout of poverty within a 3-year period. So just between the 3 of us here on the podcast, over the course of 3 years, one of us would have had an instance or a bout of poverty if we reflected the general population. So that is much higher than what most people would realize. And that's where, again, the short-term social support and material assistance programs have such great importance. Just kind of that safety net so people don't fall through the cracks or have such a challenge as they might lose a few hours at work or suffer an illness or something. Maybe you can't go into work, like break a leg or something like that, where that can really limit your ability over the short term.
Well, thank you for that, David, because I think that offers 2 things. One, it offers a sense of hope that if we can be present to people at the right time in their moment of need, we can really make a difference in helping them not slip through the cracks. And I think it doesn't seem quite so overwhelming. It's empowering to know that, okay, we can be present to people in their time of need. We can really make a difference. We can make an impact.
Yeah, and again, there's so many people that think that those in poverty, they're just not working. They could be doing more. They're not looking for work. But again, in Nebraska, one of our issues is that for whatever reason, the wage structure doesn't quite always allow everybody to get an income that's above that poverty line, even if you're working all year round. So that's where some of our challenges lie in particular. And sometimes that's why we, again, have some of the out-migration that we do, is that people do see higher incomes available in other locations of the country.
You're not coming here with some sort of liberal agenda to say, we need to raise the salaries of people. You're just saying, here are the facts.
That's all that we do, is try to present what the numbers tell us. And again, there'd be a lot of research to say, as you do raise the minimum wage, that sometimes that raises unemployment and poverty as well, even though it's kind of an unintended consequence. So there's a lot of research out there, and that's what the policy think tanks do a little bit more. We try to be more on the ground just to help people understand the situation that we have here locally, or how Omaha compares to other large metros, or how our 93 counties compare amongst each other, so that we can target programs and do things as needed for those localities.
And I don't think it needs to be a political solution. As church, it's a spiritual solution for us, right? It's about how we're living out our faith for one another and how we love our brothers and sisters. And I think that's the issue. It has nothing to do with your liberal, conservative, or whether your agreement of minimum wage, whether it needs to be raised. Let the politicians figure that out. And maybe we should have, of course, the church does have sort of a political wing, and we certainly lobby and we do what we need to do for life issues and social issues. But at the end of the day, it's also a spiritual issue. And we have to have some spiritual solutions. And I think that's the way in which we live and treat our brothers and sisters in our neighborhoods.
If your neighbor is suffering, then to a degree you might be too, because it all is for the neighborhood, and the better the health. And we have a gentleman who has some health issues on our block, and we've just been trying to help him with his yard upkeep and just keeping his things moving forward, because it's a challenge right now for him with those health issues. So I think that's kind of where the church helps and steps in to assist those who are in that type of situation.
Yeah. I mean, listening to both of you talk, I'm reminded of, Jesus' story about Lazarus and the rich man, and how easy it is to miss those that are near us. And I think, David, you've helped give us eyes, hopefully to help see those who are around us, who have needs. Any kind of closing comments or big takeaways that you'd like us to walk away with as we close up here?
Well, again, I just think that there's a lot of good opportunities, and to realize all the good works that are being done out there, both rural and urban, across the Archdiocese, because the challenge really do differ. I did some work for St. Columbkille just here on our growth. In the parish boundaries, the population's grown by 1,000 a year, or 400 households a year. Well, if let's say 20% of those households are Catholic, wow, that's a lot of people to service in church per year, so that's a good problem to have, but it can strain resources. Again, rural challenges are sometimes different, and all the people that are working to help all those situations improve just realize how important your work is.
Thank you. David, if someone wants to get a hold of you, if a pastor wants a little bit more of an in-depth understanding of their mission field, of the zip codes that make up their parish, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, the best thing to do is just Google my name, and that'll bring you to my work website. So again, it's David, last name Drozd, D-R-O-Z-D. That's me saying it the way it's spelled, so that people can see it. David Drozd, and University of Nebraska, and you should pop to me and my contact info, and we can just connect and go from there.
Thank you for the work that you do, and you can tell that your faith is pretty intimately intertwined as you think through these things. And thank you just for helping to open our eyes and see a little bit of the opportunities and trends of the mission field where the Lord has placed us.
Thanks so much. It's been a great opportunity to be here, and hope I could at least provide some insight.
Everybody, if you would like to get the show notes, you can find those on equip.archomaha.org. Don't hesitate to share this with friends who want to geek out with you about numbers and demographics. Thanks for being here. God bless.